Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. It's good to be with you. Thanks for joining us. As the country either heads out or stays home for Thanksgiving, President Trump has one more pardon beyond Tuesday's turkey. But first, the U.S. saw more than 2,000 coronavirus deaths Tuesday for the first time since May. Hospitalizations are still at an all-time high nationwide. Despite pleas from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to stay home, millions of people still plan to travel for the holiday week. President-elect Joe Biden used his Thanksgiving address this afternoon to reiterate government health guidance, which he's applying to his own plans.
This year, we're asking Americans to forego so many of the traditions that we've long made in this holiday, which made it so special. For our families, for 40-some years, we've had a tradition of traveling over Thanksgiving. Tradition that we've kept every year save one, the year our son Bo died. But this year, we'll be staying home.
President Trump is also planning to stay put for Thanksgiving after Tuesday's annual turkey pardoning tradition. Mr. Trump announced Wednesday he's also pardoning his former national security advisor. Michael Flynn pleaded guilty twice to lying to the FBI about his conversations with a Russian diplomat during the last presidential transition. In May, Attorney General William Barr sought to drop charges against Flynn, but that move is still being challenged in federal court. The president was set to travel to Gettysburg for a hearing on the election held by Republicans in the Pennsylvania State Senate. That trip was called off, but he did phone in to repeat baseless claims of voter fraud that have failed in court due to lack of evidence.
We have to turn the election over because there's no doubt we have all the evidence, we have all the affidavits, we have everything. All we need is to have some judge listen to it properly without having a political opinion or having another kind of a problem.
Catherine Herridge, Huey-Burns, and Dan Balz join me now. Catherine is CBS News senior investigative correspondent. Caitlin is CBSN's political reporter. And Dan is the Washington Post's chief correspondent covering national politics. Welcome to you all. Catherine, let's start with President Trump's pardon for Michael Flynn. Give us some context surrounding Flynn's guilty pleas and the timing of a pardon for him now.
Well, Elaine, the former national security advisor pled guilty to lying to the FBI about his conversation with the Russian ambassador Sergei Kislyak during the transition period of December 2016 and January 2017. This was shortly after the Obama administration had imposed sanctions on Russia for interfering in the 2016 election, as well as the expulsion of Russian diplomats. A short time ago, I spoke with General Flynn's brother, Joe Flynn, and he told me the family is, quote, absolutely thrilled that his 4-year political persecution is over and that he can move on with his life. The reason the timing matters is essentially the clock is running out for General Flynn and for President Trump. Prior to November 3rd, General Flynn's lawyer, Sidney Powell, told a court here in Washington that she had asked the president specifically not to pardon Michael Flynn because, if necessary, she wanted the issues in the Flynn case to reach the Supreme Court. But clearly after November 3rd, that dynamic has changed.
And Catherine, why did the Justice Department move to dismiss the charges against Flynn, and how does this pardon impact that?
So Attorney General Bill Barr tasked a U.S. Attorney, Jeff Jensen, to do a review of the Flynn case. And what Jeff Jensen recommended to the Attorney General in May is that he dismiss the charges against the National Security Advisor on the basis that he had reviewed records that in his view showed that by the end of 2016, the FBI had moved to close the counterintelligence investigation against General Flynn, and he alleged that it was specifically left open to lay a trap for General Flynn so that if he was interviewed by the FBI, he might lie about these conversations with the Russian ambassador. All of that said, critics of General Flynn point to the fact that he pled guilty twice to lying to the FBI about those conversations at that time, Elaine.
All right, Catherine Herridge, I know you have to get going. Thank you so much for joining us. Let's continue our conversation. Dan, how unusual is it for a president to issue a pardon like this on their way out?
Well, it's not at all unusual for a president to issue pardons. Almost every president does it, some more controversial than others. But this is certainly one of the most controversial pardons that President Trump could have done. I mean, this has been foreshadowed and telegraphed for some time that it was quite possible that it would take place. But nonetheless, it's a stunning act on his part. And it's clearly a part of his effort to get retribution or revenge, if you will, against the investigation into the collusion, if you will, between the Trump campaign and the Russians, which was never charged by the Mueller report, but nonetheless, a tremendous number of contacts. All of that has been, stuck in the president's craw for the better part of 4 years. And so what we've seen today is one more example of him trying to extract, as I say, some retribution to make this go away and to change history.
Meantime, Caitlin, President-elect Biden was asked last night about whether he plans to use his Justice Department to pick up investigations into President Trump. Let's listen to that.
I will not do what this president does and use the Justice Department as my vehicle to insist that something happened. There are a number of investigations that I've read about that are at a state level. There's nothing at all I can or cannot do about that. But
So, Caitlin, what should we take away from that?
Well, if you look at the moves that President-elect Biden has made over the past couple of weeks since the election was called for him, everything from mood to temperament to rhetoric to cabinet positions are all designed to draw an explicit contrast with Trump's presidency and focus on two words that we keep hearing from Biden, which are unity and healing. This has been a message that he's been putting forward since winning the election, that he wants to bring the country together. So what he mentioned in that interview seems in line with this message of not really wanting to go down that route, and also kind of drawing a contrast with how the president has behaved versus how Biden would want to behave, and how he would not direct his Justice Department to do really much of anything. So that's an important kind of distinction that they've been trying to make. And it's also important because Biden is going to need a united front heading into governing, which will be very difficult because he could likely have a divided government if Democrats aren't able to win those two Senate seats in Georgia in that runoff. Biden knows that he's going to have to work with Republicans in Congress. This election saw Republicans gain seats in the House. And so this is something that Biden has kind of alluded to also when introducing his cabinet positions and trying to avoid contentious Senate confirmation battles. So this kind of is in line with that messaging of trying to move forward and unite the country.
Well, Dan, Bloomberg reports that outgoing Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin is planning to put $455 billion of unspent coronavirus aid money into an account his successor won't be able to access without congressional approval. ProPublica also reports the Trump administration is trying to approve dozens of policy changes to weaken environmental and worker protections before inauguration in January. And your latest analysis for The Post looks at how President Trump is trying to undermine the Biden presidency. What's behind this, Dan? What have you learned?
Well, one of the things that's behind it, obviously, is the president's unwillingness to accept the fact that he lost the election. And he is trying to do everything he can rhetorically and through tweets, but in the absence of any real evidence that's been able to be held up in court, to try to continue to drive that message as he was doing again today. The actions that he and some of the agencies will be taking will be an effort to, in a sense, embed the Trump presidency and its policies into the government in a way that would make it more difficult for President-elect Biden than President Biden to be able to govern as he wishes. Now, to the extent that some of these are executive orders, they can be reversed through executive orders. But every barrier he sets up makes it more difficult for the Biden administration to start moving in the direction that they have promised the country. So this is something that I think we anticipated with the president, but he's carried it on for now several weeks, despite the fact that they've opened the transition formally. The president himself is not willing to sort of step aside, if you will, and make it easier for a transition in the more traditional sense. I think the other thing that we know is that there are 74 million people who voted for President Trump, and many of them genuinely believe that the president's words that the election was quote unquote stolen. The president is continuing to stoke that, and I think the fear of the Democrats is that he will stoke that even when he is out of office and continue to be, in essence, a kind of a government in exile, making life difficult for President Biden. So that's the kind of totality of what Biden faces. As Caitlin indicated, if they don't get control of the Senate, they're going to face real problems trying to get anything through without great compromises, which will cause some difficulties within the Democratic family because the progressives want a big and bold agenda, and it may not be possible if the Republicans control the Senate for Biden to be able to deliver on that.
Yeah, we've been focusing so much of our attention on that January 5th date for those runoff races in Georgia. Caitlin, I want to ask you about something set to take place on Monday. The Supreme Court is set to hear arguments in a challenge to President Trump's order that seeks to exclude undocumented immigrants from the 2020 census. What is the significance of that case, and what impact would such an exclusion have?
Well, it could have an impact on representation and seats in the House of Representatives. In last year, the Trump administration tried to put a census question in about citizenship. That was highly controversial and struck down by the Supreme Court, or blocked by the Supreme Court. Afterwards, his administration instructed the Secretary of Commerce to exclude undocumented immigrants from being counted in the apportionment of House seats. And so that's what this is centered on, the Supreme Court case, which they will hear on Monday. So several House seats could be at stake with this decision, if it is to come.
All right, a lot of developments here in the horizon. I hope you're both able to get just a little bit of rest this Thanksgiving holiday. Caitlin Huey-Burns and Dan Balz, thank you both, and have a happy Thanksgiving.